Hello and welcome to the mains PYQ discussion by New IAS. We have a question from the 2023 mains here. The question goes like this: how did colonial rule affect the tribal in India, and what was the tribal response to colonial oppression? So basically, this question has two parts. One is the impact of colonial rule on tribals in India. Second is the response of tribals towards that. So we will start with a very broad introduction. We'll say that the colonial rule had an effect on every cross section in Indian society, and one of them were tribals. Now, what was the speciality of tribal response? The speciality of this response was it was one of the initial responses in India. So, when we take the princely states, the tribals, the peasants, the national movement, tribal response was one of the initial responses. So if you take the dates of moments like the Call Mutiny or the Santal Rebellion, this can be seen as initial responses. So we won't talk about that here, examples that we will give in the second part. Here we will just say that tribal response was one of the initial responses which can be considered in the larger fold of national movement. Then we will give a map as a proper value addition. This is a 15 marker, so you can accommodate a map quite easily. In the map, we can mark three major areas. We cannot obviously mark all the revolts here. We'll mark three major areas. One is the Kumaon region, the Uttarakhand, modern day Uttarakhand region, where you can give the Kumaon revolt. Second is this region. It is in this region you have a series of revolts. For example, the Munda revolt, the Santal revolt. So we can give two examples and give the region like this. Then you can give the Kol rebellion in the Chhatanagpur region. Now that's it with the map. It's easy for you to remember because the classification is quite simple. Now when it comes to the effect of colonial rule in tribal India, we have made the classification on different fronts. And we have started with the most fundamental of all, which is land. Now tribal people, you should understand that at that time, their mode of economy was land-based. They haven't transformed to any mode of modern economics. So land was the major form of economical capital, and that is where the British interfered. So they disrupted, the British administration disrupted the traditional land management system. For example, the Kutkati system. You can give this keyword. So land can be given as one dimension. Maybe you can give it as a side heading and you can give this point with this value addition. Second is with respect to law. First, the Britishers came up with Indian traditional law. They established the Calcutta Madrasa and they reformed using the Persian law itself. They started bringing in new reforms. Then they studied the Hindu scriptures. For example, they formed the Banaras Hindu College. And finally, they introduced the English law system here with English and jurists from Britain. So what happens as a result is the traditional legal system of the tribals are getting disrupted because they are also getting tried under the English law. For example, take the case of the plundering tribes, the criminal tribes. The Britishers designated a group of tribes as criminal tribes or bandits, and they were executed under the English law. So you can give this point, just say law, the new justice system disrupted traditional system, and for example, you can give something like the criminal tribes. Third is with respect to agriculture. Now here you have to understand that all the tribals were not settled agriculturalists. Some of them practiced slash and burn agriculture or shifting cultivation. And it is very difficult for the British or anyone for that matter to tax people who are constantly moving. So for that, you have to settle them down. And that creates a conflict. And when they are traveling, it's difficult to control them. It's difficult to make them cultivate the commercial crops that the British wanted. So that also leads to tension. So people in the Rajamahal Hills came into conflict because of this reason. So we can give agriculture and the expansion of commercial crops by dikus. Dikus is the term that the tribals use for foreigners. So you can use this keyword in this answer under the domain of agriculture. Fourth is with respect to the forest rights. So Britishers needed timber from India for the expansion of railways as well as for other purposes in industrial revolution because wood was a major construction material at that time. So they came up with the Indian Forest Act of 1865. This classified certain forests as reserved forests, and tribals were deprived of their rights in forest. So this again created a tension. Next up is religion. A classical example is the Munda rebellion. So Christian missionaries used to preach religion, which disrupted the traditional ways. Next you have forced labor. So this was something that was very common. Tribals also were affected to that. The keyword beggar, which means forced labor, can be used in this dimension. Finally, disruption to the social order. This can be an extension to the missionary point here. So when you have moneylenders, zamindars, British and the missionaries coming together, the social order in the tribal society will get disrupted. So what you can see is a classification of the impact of British rule on tribals under 7 different points. So you can give this as it is. It's a very good dimension here that we have presented. Now let's come to the response. Here we have given three major revolts. First is Call Mutiny, one we have marked here, the year and the person associated with it. Second is Santal Revolt, 1855, Sidhu and Kannu, the persons associated with it. Third is Birsa Munda. So these three major rebellions we have to mark as mandatory. Anything else that you have, you can add, but three will be enough. Then you can talk about organizations that they have formed. Apart from revolts, armed rebellions, they have formed organizations. One is the Adivasi Mahasabha in 1930s. Next up, we can talk about their contribution to the national movement. For example, the Bardoli Satyagraha. So revolts, organizations and national movements, these are the kind of response that we had from the tribal society. Present this part with this value addition. Finally, we'll conclude this answer with a current affairs where PM Modi has mentioned in his 75th Independence Day speech, he gave a list of tribal leaders who contributed to the independence. For example, he mentioned Alluri Sida Ramaraju in that. So what you can do is to just mention this event where Prime Minister Modi mentioned the name of tribal leaders and their contribution to the national movement, thus underlining the legacy of tribal movements in India's national movement. So that's how you can conclude this. That's it. Thank you for listening.